Do you want to give presentations that are remembered for all the right reasons? Do you want to give a presentation that gets the best grade possible? Hi, my name's Erica Williams, and I've worked as a business coach, a business trainer, a university senior lecturer, and I've also written a number of books. I've trained hundreds of people to give better presentations. Now, as we learned in a previous video of mine, which was called Understand the Task, we learned that presentation is all about communication. And communication is about the speaker and the listener. And then in order to give a great presentation, it's really important that you as a presenter, that you in the presentation build up the relationship between you, the speaker, and the listener. Now, in presentations, listeners have to listen for a really long period of time. They do sometimes have opportunity to give feedback during a presentation, or maybe to ask a few questions at the end of the presentation. But all in all, listeners have to listen for a longer period of time, and they have to do a lot of passive listening. And therefore, it's really important for you to know, and it's really useful to know, how listeners listen and how they process information. And if you learn this, this will enable you to give much more effective, much more enjoyable, and much more memorable presentations. Now, there are different steps to listening, and what I would like to do in this video is take you through these different steps of listening, and I'll explain to you how listeners pay attention, how they take your spoken messages and convert them into some kind of meaning, and then hopefully store those messages in their heads. Now, for me, there are 5 steps of listening, particularly passive listening, the kind of passive listening that goes on in presentations. And what I would like to do in this video is take you through these 5 steps, and then I'll go through the 5 steps again and explain with each step what you should do as a presenter to accommodate each step. So let's get started. So for me, these are the steps of listening. There is hearing, paying attention, understanding, processing, and remembering. Okay, so first of all, let's give an overview of these 5 steps. So firstly, there's hearing. And hearing is all about the physical ability to hear something. Secondly, there's paying attention. And paying attention is about, really, it's about being in the moment. It's about the listener making a conscious choice to pay attention to something. Then we move on to understanding. Understanding is sometimes called a comprehension, and this is about understanding the spoken message. And we have to talk about understanding both from a content and from a language point of view. So then after the message has been understood, then we come on to processing. And processing is sometimes called interpreting. And this is about the listener taking the message and using the message and testing it out against the listener's own experience, the listener's own perception of the world, the listener's own knowledge. There's a lot of evaluating going on here, so testing out the material, whether it makes sense or it doesn't make sense to the listener. There's some analysing, and there's also some judgment going on with this step. And finally, when we've got through those 4 steps, then we'll come on to remembering. And remembering, and this is a word that we keep coming back to time and time and time again with presentations, remembering is surely our aim as presenters. We want to achieve and design a piece of work that is remembered and is stored in the heads of our listeners long after the presentation has finished. Now, before we go back through the 5 steps and talk about what you should do as a presenter with each of these 5 steps, I'd like to talk about the overall theme with the 5 steps when it comes to presenting. And this is the question of time and space. When you're designing your presentation and when you're giving your presentation, what you want to do is provide space and time in the presentation for the listener to go through each of the 5 steps. And this is really related to the whole concept of information overload, which I dealt with in a previous video, Don't Kill It, and the whole theory of cognitive load. The more that you provide time and space and room in your presentation, the more you will be cutting down your material and working with your material so that it works within the time frame that you've been given for the presentation, and because you've given the time and space within your design. Okay, so let's move on to the first step, which is hearing. Now, hearing is about the physical ability to hear. Now, it could be that you have some listeners who have some physical disabilities with hearing, but overall, hearing is very much in control of the presenter. And if you've got the opportunity, what it's a really good idea to do is to get into the room where you're going to present before you actually give the presentation. And check the room out. You know, how big is the room? When you're in the room and somebody's speaking at the front of the room, can people hear at the back of the room? If it's a wide room, can people hear at either side of the room? Now, these days, there's plenty of technology available. If people can't hear, then just get yourself a microphone, or maybe you need to get some speakers or something else for your laptop. Now, there's other things you can check with noise and sound so that people can hear. Maybe the room is on a busy street. Maybe there's some construction work going on outside. Maybe it's a street where there's lots and lots of traffic noise. So you just simply need to close the window. Maybe because of the type of presentation you're giving, maybe you need to look at the chairs and maybe you need to rearrange the seating. Rather than having people in rows, for example, maybe you want to put people in the room into circles, into small groups in the room. These are all things that you can do to help the hearing. Environment is also important for hearing. Is the environment that you're going to be working in, is it compatible for hearing? Is it too hot? Is it too cold? If it's too hot, is there air conditioning? If you put the air conditioning on, is it noisy, or is it noisy in different parts of the room? This will help you to get ready for the first step, which is hearing. Okay, so now that we've dealt with hearing, let's move on to the next step, which is paying attention. Paying attention, being in the moment, attending, making a conscious choice to listen. Now, attention has a lot to do with a previous video, again, that I made about paying attention. And in this video, we looked at the attention listening curve. And we learned from the attention listening curve that there are key points in the presentation to do with attention. And this was at the beginning and at the end of the presentation when attention is very high. And it's also to do with the middle part of the presentation where attention tends to be naturally at a lower point for a longer time. Now, there are 2 things that we can learn from this. Starts and finishes are really important. We can more or less guarantee that our listeners will be in the moment when we give our starts and our finishes. And these are key points of the presentation that we need to prepare very carefully, and we need to practice them. We need to get off to a good start and make a good finish. And then the longer period of time in a presentation where attention can drop off is very much to do with rhetorical techniques, devices, and the skills of presentation. What we do with rhetorical devices is we use devices in order to really take listeners through these different steps of listening. And there are certain techniques that we use that help listeners make a conscious choice to listen. Now, I could just go through a few techniques here. For example, we can talk about shocking facts. So when I look at this audience, 90% of you will only get their pension when they're over the age of 70. I can look at shocking statistics. Look at the person on your left, look at the person on your right. One of you will get cancer in your lifetime. Or I can simply use a dramatic picture. These are the kind of techniques that we can use in order to get attention. Now, there's one thing that's really important to draw your attention to here, and that's the question of relevance. It's really important that when you use a technique to get attention, that you make it relevant to your presentation. It's no good using a technique to get attention and then you leave your audience thinking about the relevance of the technique. You make your audience really confused and they're really thinking about other things, and they're thinking about why something is happening rather than listening to the content of your presentation. Now, if you do this, what's happening is you're achieving completely the opposite effect of the one that you want to achieve. Now, let me give an example here. For example, if I was at a professional conference, I could choose, for example, to come onto the stage and to be dressed as a clown. Now, dressing as a clown, this would get attention. It would be different, and it would make people make a conscious choice to pay attention to me. However, if I continued the presentation and went through the whole presentation and I made no reference to the clown's costume, or I didn't explain why I was using the clown's costume during the presentation, what I would do is simply leave my listening audience completely confused, and in the end they would not be listening to the spoken message that I'm giving in my presentation. So be relevant, be relevant, be relevant. So as a presenter, I've now done something about the first two steps, hearing and paying attention. And the next thing I really need to look at now is understanding or comprehension. And I really have to look at understanding from 2 points of view. The first is content and the second is language. Now, content is all to do with complexity and the complexity of the material and the ideas that you're trying to present to your audience. Now, think about things. Are you presenting new things? Are you presenting ideas that are very familiar to you, but they're very unfamiliar to your audience? Are you presenting a really complicated idea or a very complicated argument? If you are, then you're going to have to build up the complexity slowly. i.e., you're going to have to build up the time and space in your presentation in order to build this complexity. If I'm a scientist and I'm presenting to other scientists, then there's a certain level of complexity that I can use in my presentation. If I'm working in a company and I'm presenting about a production process, and that process is really familiar to me, then I really have to begin to put myself in the shoes of my listeners and think about what they know about the production process and present the production process from their point of view rather than from my point of view. Now, the second thing with understanding is certainly language. And we really have to think about, first of all, the language that we're presenting in. Are you presenting to other people who have the same language as you? Or are you presenting to an audience that have different languages and don't have your language as their first language? Now, if we're talking about international presentations, then we really have to think about using English as a global language. If we took statistics around the world, the majority of presentations in the world that are being given at the time that you're listening to this, they are given in English. And English is used as a global language. Now, if you're a native speaker of English, native speakers can be really notoriously bad at presenting to an international audience. Think about the level of vocabulary that you're using. Are you using vocabulary that will be difficult for non-native speakers of English? Are you using a level of English that is far too colloquial? Or are you using grammatical constructions that can be quite difficult for a non-native speaking audience? For example, talking about hypothesis or something like this. Also, when it comes to language, think about jargon and think about the in-house language that you have in your company or your organization. Again, this kind of jargon will be very familiar to you, but it will be unfamiliar to the audience you're presenting to. For example, even in the university I worked in, we had different abbreviations and names for different faculties, for different buildings, for different subject areas. Now, these were all very familiar to people working within the organization. So if I presented to them, I wouldn't have to think about the jargon. But if I presented to people outside the organization, then I would have to think about explaining the jargon or using other words for the jargon and abbreviations. So I'm in the audience and I'm a listener, and I'm really enjoying the presentation. I really like the presenter, and I really understand the content, both from a complexity and from a language point of view. Now, it's really important here that the presenter then gives me, as an audience member, the opportunity to process information. Processing is interpreting, it's evaluating, it's testing, it's judging material. I'm testing things out against my own knowledge, my own perceptions, my own experience, and I'm really working out if things make sense or they don't make sense. And I'm trying to get to the next step, which is putting all this information into my head. Now, this is where rhetorical devices and techniques become really important. We use these techniques in order to provide the time and space for the processing step. What I'd like to do here is then maybe just go through a few techniques to give you the idea of how they work. Now, one of the most basic techniques that we can use is repetition. Repetition, repetition, repetition. Now, if you think about repetition, the first time when somebody says something, you might just hear it. When they repeat something the second time, then I might begin to understand, or I might begin to pay attention to, or I might begin a little bit to think about the content of the presentation. When something is said a third time, this is really where I really begin to process and I really maybe begin to store things into my head. So repeating the same thing, saying the same thing again and again and again can be really effective. Now, when we first start out as presenters, repetition can be really difficult to do. It feels a little bit strange, and sometimes it feels a little bit as presenters that it's overkill. And sometimes in education, we get told that repetition is a bad thing. For example, when I was in school, I can really remember being told that when I wrote an essay, that I shouldn't keep repeating the same words over and over and over again. I was often told by my teacher that I should try and find a new word for something, and I should try and build up my vocabulary. And it sometimes feels a little bit counterintuitive to be doing repetition in the presentation. But the more you do it, the easier it becomes, the more it becomes part of your range, and it becomes part of yourself as a presenter. And it's really a good idea then just to repeat, repeat, repeat. Now, another technique that people often use is storytelling. And storytelling is great. First of all, we engage with stories. We begin to listen through to stories from the beginning to the end. And when a presenter puts together a story, they have a certain picture in their head. Now let's take a simple story. This could be a story, for example, it's a bright sunny day and the presenter is walking through a forest and is looking at the trees, and the presenter gets to a clearing and sees a house. Now, if I'm listening to this, what I will begin to do is listen to the story, and I'll begin to have my own pictures in my head. So for me, it could be a really bright, sunny, autumnal day. I'm seeing a forest that is very near my home, and I get to the clearing and I see a European house. All of this is processing material and relating the material to my own experience and the way that I see the world. We looked, in a previous video, we looked at the question of rhetorical questions. And rhetorical questions are also really great because as soon as you ask somebody a question, they have to think about the content. They have to think about material, and they have to think probably about the answers or the possible answers to the questions that you're asking. Now, in this whole process, the listener is engaging with material, they're processing material, and they're going through this step of processing. What professors often do, for example, is just simply testing. When you've attended a longer lecture of, say, 90 minutes, what the professor might do is actually test content in the middle of the lecture and help you to process the material. So that if I'm a listener now, we're getting a good presentation. The presenter has checked that I can hear. They've used devices to make sure I pay attention. They've designed their content and they've given me opportunity to process. And then we get to the last step, which is remembering. And remembering is surely our aim as presenter. We want to give a spoken message that is stored in the head after the presentation has finished, or even long after the presentation has finished. And this has been all about going through the 5 steps of listening, knowing about the 5 steps of listening, and designing the presentation so that the 5 steps of listening are taken care of in the presentation. And if you think about this, this is all about relationship. It's the relationship between the presenter, the speaker, and the listener and the listeners. And what you're trying to do is build a good, positive relationship. Now, maybe I can give you an example here. In the university, I've attended days where I might have seen or examined 10 or maybe even 15 presentations on one day. And one of the things I would like to do after a day of examining presentations was wake up in the morning and think about what were the presentations that I remembered. Now, sometimes it's possible that you remember something because things went wrong. But on the whole, the presentations that we remember, they tend to be the good presentations, And they tend to be good presentations because the presenter has beautifully prepared and designed their presentation so they accommodate the 5 steps of listening, and they've built the relationship with me, the listener. And when you're giving an exam presentation, this is definitely one of the things that you want to aim for, is to aim for that positive relationship between you and the person listening. This will guarantee you much better grades. Always remember, presentations are an opportunity. Presentation is your opportunity to show that you're prepared. They're your opportunity to show that you're organized. Your opportunity to show that you're properly managed. It's your opportunity to get that better grade. Now, before I close this video, I would just like to mention another aspect of listening. Now, if you look around the internet and you look for definitions of listening, one of the things you'll find is probably the aspect of feedback. Now, this is more probably to do with active listening than passive listening, and presentations are much more to do with sometimes, or very often, passive listening. But feedback is also important. Now, feedback is often not given directly in a presentation. Sometimes there are opportunities for questions, but if you give a good or even a great presentation, you will get feedback, this other step of active listening. And feedback might come after the presentation. People come up to you and they talk to you. Maybe you get some emails from people who were in your audience later in the week. Or you might even find a year after the presentation is finished that people are still talking about your presentation. So what we've done in this video is go through the 5 steps of listening. Hearing, paying attention, understanding, processing, and remembering. And then what we've done is go through the 5 steps and talk about what you can do as a presenter to accommodate these 5 steps. So now, if you've been going through my videos, you might be finding that you're a much better speaker, a better presenter. You find that you're probably getting better feedback on your presentations, and you're also maybe finding out that you're a much better listener than you were in the past. If you are, please put your comments down below. I'd be really interested in reading them. Also, you'd be really helping me with this channel and helping me to put a lot more videos for you in the future if you could like and subscribe to the channel. Also, please have a look at my Etsy sheet, worksheet, a study guide. This is a study guide for first-time presenters, and if you need help preparing and organizing your presentation, you'll find lots of tips and exercises in this worksheet to help you with the preparation. So it just remains for me now to thank you for listening to this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.